The autumn wind of 1876 sliced through the pine-covered foothills of Colorado's San Juan Mountains with the sharpness of a cavalry blade, carrying the scent of approaching snow and something else, something wild and predatory, that made every instinct in Eliza Warren's body scream danger. She pressed both hands against her swollen belly, feeling the baby kick frantically as another wave of pain rolled through her like thunder across the peaks. 7 months. The child wasn't supposed to come for another 7 weeks, but her body had other plans entirely. The cramping had started at dawn as she picked her way along the narrow deer trail, growing stronger and more urgent with each passing hour, until she could no longer pretend these were ordinary pregnancy discomforts. These were contractions, real powerful and terrifyingly premature. Her legs trembled as she forced herself forward along the rocky path that wound between towering ponderosa pines and weathered granite outcroppings. The small wooden chest she'd been carrying, containing everything precious she had left in this harsh world, suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. She set it down against a moss-covered boulder, her hands shaking as she tried to catch her breath in the thin mountain air. That's when the growl came. Low and rumbling, it seemed to emerge from the very stones beneath her feet, a sound that every frontier dweller feared above all others, the territorial warning of a grizzly bear. Eliza's blood turned to ice as she recognized the deep bass note that meant death was stalking her through these isolated mountains. She looked around desperately, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. The trail ahead disappeared around a bend lined with thick underbrush. Behind her, the path she'd traveled stretched back down the mountainside, but she knew she'd never make it far enough to find safety, not in her condition. To her left, the ground dropped away into a steep ravine filled with jumbled boulders and fallen timber. To her right rose a sheer cliff face of red sandstone, impossible to climb. Another contraction seized her, this one so powerful, it drove her to her knees on the sharp stones. She bit down on her lower lip until she tasted copper, fighting not to scream. The bear was close now. She could smell its wild musk, that combination of fur and old meat and primitive danger that made her stomach churn with terror. The growl came again, much closer, accompanied by the sound of heavy paws on stone and the crack of breaking branches. Eliza forced herself upright, abandoning the wooden chest without a backward glance. She stumbled forward along the trail, one hand pressed to her lower back, the other cradling her belly as tears of fear and pain streamed down her dirt-streaked cheeks. She'd made it perhaps 50 yards when her dress caught on a thorny bush. In her desperation to break free, she pulled too hard and went sprawling, landing hard on her side among the rocky debris beside the trail. Pain shot through her shoulder and hip, and she felt something warm spreading across the fabric of her torn skirt. Blood. As she struggled to sit up, gasping in the thin air, another contraction seized her stronger than any before. This time, she couldn't hold back the scream that tore from her throat, a sound of pure anguish that seemed to hang in the mountain air before being swallowed by the vast silence of the wilderness. That's when she saw him. He emerged from the shadows between the trees, like something from a fever dream, a tall figure wrapped in buckskin and fur, with long black hair flowing from beneath a magnificent war bonnet, adorned with eagle feathers and intricate beadwork. Bone and silver ornaments decorated his chest, catching the late afternoon light, and his dark eyes held a coldness that made her breath catch in her throat. A Navajo warrior, she realized, with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. Here, hundreds of miles from his people's traditional lands, armed with both a rifle and the traditional weapons that had struck fear into settler hearts across the territory for generations. For a long moment, neither moved. Eliza could see the hostility in his angular face, the way his scarred hand rested on the handle of the knife at his belt. She knew what he saw when he looked at her, just another white settler, another representative of the people who had driven his kind from their ancestral homes and slaughtered them without mercy. But then another contraction hit, like a physical blow, and she doubled over with a strangled cry that spoke of desperation beyond words. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of recognition perhaps, or simple human compassion that transcended the barriers of race and history. The bear's roar shattered the tension between them much closer, now followed by the crash of something massive moving through the underbrush. The warrior's head snapped toward the sound, his grip tightening on his Winchester rifle. And Eliza saw him make a choice that would change both their lives forever. 3 days earlier, Eliza Warren had fled the mining town of Iron Ridge, with nothing but the clothes on her back, her dead husband's wooden chest, and a determination born of pure desperation. The town had been no place for a pregnant widow, especially one whose husband had died under circumstances that left far more questions than answers. Thomas Warren had been a good man, a railroad foreman who treated his workers fairly and never cheated anyone in his 32 years of honest labor. But fair treatment counted for little when corruption ran as deep as the gold veins in the surrounding mountains, and honest men had a tendency to die young in places where money mattered more than morality. She'd found his body herself slumped over his desk in the railroad office with a bullet hole behind his left ear. The scene had been hastily rearranged to look like he'd been killed elsewhere and dragged back. But Eliza had noticed the blood patterns that told a different story. Someone had executed her husband in cold blood right there in his own office, then tried to cover it up with a clumsy staging that fooled no one who looked carefully. The wooden chest contained what Thomas had died trying to protect, his meticulously kept journal, filled with detailed notes about irregularities in the railroad payroll, and most importantly, a sworn statement from Dr. Samuel Morrison, the town's physician. The document was brief but devastating. I, Dr. Samuel Morrison, do hereby swear that I witnessed Mr. Garrett Hutchins strike down Thomas Warren with a pistol shot to the head on the evening of October 15, 1876, after Mr. Warren confronted him about missing payroll funds totaling $5,000. The witness statement bore Dr. Morrison's signature and medical seal, witnessed by 2 other men whose names Eliza didn't recognize. But when she'd gone looking for the doctor after finding Thomas's body, his house was empty, and his neighbors said he'd disappeared in the middle of the night, leaving behind all his belongings as if he'd fled for his life. Hidden beneath the other papers was Thomas's final letter to her, written in his careful handwriting. My dearest Eliza, if you are reading this, then my fears have proven justified, and Hutchins has silenced me permanently. Trust in Dr. Morrison, above all others. He is a good man, and the only one who knows the complete truth about what Hutchins has done. The evidence in this chest must reach the territorial authorities, no matter the cost. Our child deserves to grow up in a world where justice means something, where honest men don't have to die for doing what's right. The letter was dated just 2 days before his murder, suggesting Thomas had known his investigation was putting him in mortal danger, but had pressed forward anyway. The knowledge that her husband had walked knowingly into death for the sake of justice made Eliza even more determined to ensure his sacrifice hadn't been in vain. Now her destination was her brother's homestead in the New Mexico territory, 100 miles of treacherous mountain terrain, where a pregnant woman traveling alone faced constant danger from wild animals, harsh weather, and the outlaws who preyed on anyone foolish enough to venture into the wilderness unprepared. But staying in Iron Ridge meant certain death. Hutchins had made that clear with the hard-faced men who'd started appearing near her boarding house, asking questions about what her husband might have left behind. 50 miles to the north, the Navajo warrior called Taji had been tracking an elk herd along the same mountain range when word reached him from his cousin Nalnish about strange happenings in the white settlements. A doctor from Iron Ridge had been seen in the high country. Nalnish reported moving like a man running for his life and asking questions about safe places to hide from powerful enemies. The news had stirred something in Taji's mind, a connection to his own mission of vengeance against the white men who had destroyed his family and poisoned his people's lands. He'd been away from his tribe for 3 weeks now, following a path of revenge that had led him far from the high desert country of his birth and deep into the heart of enemy territory. The jagged scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw was a gift from the U.S. cavalry, a saber wound earned during a raid 2 summers past when the blue-coated soldiers had come to drive his band from their traditional hunting grounds to make way for mining operations. His younger brother Ahiga had died in that same raid, shot down while trying to protect the women and children as they fled toward the safety of the sacred canyons. But it wasn't just the cavalry that had earned Taji's undying hatred. It was men like Garrett Hutchins, whose mining and railroad operations had poisoned the mountain streams and driven away the game that his people depended on for survival. Hutchins owned interests in 3 different mining concerns scattered across the territory, and his operations had turned pristine mountain streams into toxic sludge that killed fish by the thousands and sickened anyone foolish enough to drink from the contaminated waters. Taji had spent months learning the white man's language, studying their ways of war and commerce, preparing for the moment when he would have his revenge. The tribal elders had spoken in council about a prophecy that justice would come through unexpected alliances, that enemies would become brothers in the fight against a greater evil. But Taji had put little faith in such mystical talk, focusing instead on his very practical plans for making Hutchins pay for every drop of poisoned water and every life lost to his greed. Yet the tribal code that had guided his ancestors for countless generations demanded not just vengeance, but also protection of the innocent and vulnerable. The old conflict stirred in his chest as he contemplated the crying woman before him, representative of his enemies, yet clearly in desperate need of help that only he could provide. 20 miles to the south, 3 men in the faded blue uniforms of deserters from Fort Garland were making camp in a sheltered grove beside a mountain stream. Sergeant Milo Kane, a scarred veteran of the Apache campaigns, studied the hand-drawn map that Garrett Hutchins had provided, along with their substantial payment. She can't have gotten far. Kane muttered to his companions, both former cavalry troopers who discovered that desertion paid considerably better than military service, when it came with a job offer from a wealthy railroad boss. Pregnant woman on foot carrying a heavy chest. We'll have her by tomorrow night at the latest. Private Morrison, a different Morrison than the doctor, sharing only a surname, shifted nervously beside the campfire they'd built for warmth against the mountain chill. What about that Dr. Hutchins mentioned, the one who signed that paper about the murder? Kane's laughter was harsh and without humor. Old Doc Morrison. He's been dead for weeks, boy. Hutchins made sure of that personally after the fools signed that witness statement. Body's probably buzzard food up in some canyon by now. The sergeant spat into the fire, sending up a brief hiss of steam. No, we just got the woman to worry about, and she ain't gonna be much trouble in her condition. But Kane was wrong about Dr. Morrison's fate. The physician was very much alive, hiding in the depths of the abandoned widow's whale mine deep in traditional Navajo territory. Morrison had indeed witnessed Hutchins' murder. Thomas Warren had signed the statement that could destroy the corrupt railroad boss, and had then fled for his life when he realized Hutchins intended to silence all witnesses permanently. His staged death had been convincing enough to fool even Kane's sources. But the doctor lived in constant fear of discovery. What Kane didn't know was that his casual dismissal of Morrison's survival would soon prove to be a fatal miscalculation, one that would cost him his life and destroy his employer's carefully laid plans for eliminating all evidence of systematic corruption and murder. The massive grizzly emerged from the underbrush like 800 pounds of primal fury, its massive shoulders rolling with each step as it moved with deceptive grace through the scattered boulders. Its small, intelligent eyes fixed on Eliza with predatory focus, and she knew with crystalline certainty that she was about to die in the most horrible way imaginable. But then the rifle shot split the evening air like a thunderclap. The bear reared up on its hind legs, standing nearly 10 feet tall as it roared in surprise and rage. The bullet had struck a rock inches from its massive head, sending stone chips flying in all directions. The beast swung its enormous skull toward the source of the threat, and Eliza saw Taji standing 30 yards up the trail, his Winchester leveled and ready for a killing shot. "We'll move behind the rocks," he commanded in heavily accented but clear English, never taking his eyes off the towering predator. "Go quickly now, before it decides we are worth the trouble." Eliza didn't need further encouragement. Fighting through another contraction that nearly doubled her over, she scrambled behind a pile of granite boulders that had tumbled down from the cliff face above during some long-ago rock slide. Her dress tore on the sharp edges, but she barely noticed the sting of minor cuts as adrenaline flooded her system like liquid fire. The bear dropped back to all fours and took a deliberate step toward Taji, who fired a second shot over its head. The sharp crack reverberated off the canyon walls, and after a long moment of tense standoff that seemed to stretch into eternity, the grizzly apparently decided that easier prey could be found elsewhere in these abundant mountains. With a final, almost contemptuous snort that seemed to express its opinion of the proceedings, it turned and shambled back into the dense forest. Tazi kept his rifle trained on the spot where the massive animal had disappeared until the sound of breaking branches faded completely. Only then did he lower his weapon and turn his attention to the woman who had now become his responsibility, whether he wanted such a burden or not. He found her crouched behind the boulders, her arms wrapped protectively around her swollen belly. Tears streaming down her face as she fought through another contraction that left her gasping for breath. Blood stained her torn skirt from her fall, and her breathing came in short, rapid gasps that spoke of both physical pain and absolute terror. "The baby," she whispered when she saw him approach with the cautious movements of a man accustomed to dealing with wounded animals. "It's coming too early. I'm only 7 months along." Taji knelt beside her, his trained eye taking in the signs he recognized from helping with births in his own village. Her contractions were strong and regular, her water hadn't broken yet, but the stress and physical exertion had clearly triggered premature labor. She had time, but not much, and certainly not enough to reach any kind of proper medical care. "We need shelter from the wind and cold," he said, scanning the darkening canyon with the practiced gaze of a man who had survived many dangerous nights in hostile territory. "There is a shallow cave near the river, but first we must retrieve what you dropped." He helped her to her feet, and together they returned to where she'd abandoned the wooden chest. As Taji lifted the container, testing its weight, Eliza saw him studying her with new curiosity. "What is in here that is worth risking your life to carry through the wilderness?" he asked. Before Eliza could answer, the sound of hoofbeats began to echo from the direction of the main trail. Multiple horses moving at a steady pace through the canyon, their riders clearly unconcerned about stealth. The sound sent a chill through both of them, because it meant their encounter with the bear had been witnessed, or at least heard. "We must go," Taji said urgently, shouldering the chest. "Those are not friendly voices I hear approaching." As if to confirm his assessment, a harsh shout carried across the canyon. "Fresh tracks here and blood on the rocks. She's hurt and moving slow." 3 riders emerged from the trees, their blue uniforms marking them as military men, though something about their bearing suggested they were far from any official business. The leader dismounted and examined the ground, where Eliza had fallen, his scarred face breaking into a predatory grin when he found the evidence he was looking for. "This is it, boys," Sergeant Kane called to his companions. "Warren woman was here not 20 minutes ago. Blood trail says she's in bad shape, and those tracks heading toward the river mean she's got help Indian by the look of these moccasin prints." He remounted his horse with practiced efficiency. "Hutchins wants that chest and no witnesses. We finish this tonight." Hidden behind the rocks, Taji made quick calculations. The men were experienced hunters with good horses, and they'd found a clear trail to follow. But the approaching darkness would level the playing field, and he knew this terrain better than any white soldiers ever could. "Can you walk?" he whispered to Eliza, who was gripping his arm as another contraction built to its peak. She nodded, though her face was pale with exhaustion and pain. "I have to. For my baby and for my husband, who died trying to protect what's in that chest." Something in her voice, the combination of grief, determination, and fierce maternal protectiveness stirred an unexpected response in Taji's heart. This was not just another white settler fleeing consequences of her own people's greed. This was a woman fighting for justice, carrying evidence that might serve the cause of truth. "Then we go to ground where they cannot follow," he said, helping her to her feet. "There is a place my people know where the white man's horses cannot go, and his weapons offer little advantage." By the time the moon had risen high enough to cast silver light across the canyon floor, transforming the landscape into a maze of black shadows and bright highlights, Eliza's contractions had settled into a rhythm that Taji recognized as early labor, painful and frightening, but not yet immediately life-threatening. She had perhaps a few hours before the birth became urgent, but they needed to reach safety before then. He'd spent the past hour fashioning a crude but functional travois from 2 long pine saplings and strips of rawhide cut from his own gear, creating a stretcher that would allow him to move her even if she became unable to walk. The work had been complicated by the absolute need for silence any unusual sound might carry to the men who were methodically searching the canyon below for signs of their quarry. "Can you lie flat on this?" he whispered to Eliza, who was gripping his hand with surprising strength as another contraction built to its peak and then slowly subsided. She nodded, though perspiration beaded on her forehead from the effort of staying silent through waves of pain that seemed to be growing stronger with each passing hour. With his careful help, she settled onto the improvised stretcher, biting down hard on a piece of leather he'd given her to prevent any involuntary cries that might give away their position to listening enemies. Taji had chosen their destination with tactical precision. The abandoned Widow's Whale mine sat deep in traditional Navajo territory, carved into a mountainside that was sacred to his people and shunned by most whites. The silver had been worked out years ago, but the mine's maze of tunnels and chambers could provide shelter from both weather and pursuers. More importantly, his cousin Nalnish had mentioned strange signs around the old mine evidence, that someone had been living there recently, someone who moved like a man hiding from powerful enemies. The journey was treacherous in the shifting moonlight. Taji had to pull the travois carefully over rocky ground, while staying constantly alert for any sign of their hunters. Twice, he had to stop and help Eliza through particularly intense contractions, covering her mouth with his calloused hand to muffle sounds she couldn't completely suppress despite her determined efforts. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit never quite faded. Kane and his men were experienced trackers, and they were methodically following the trail that led deeper into the mountains. But they were also operating in unfamiliar territory, while Taji moved through landscape that was as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. "The mine is just ahead," he whispered to Eliza during a brief rest. "Once we are inside, they will not be able to follow easily. Too many tunnels, too many places to hide." "Mikilrout, what if we get lost in there?" she asked, her voice tight with more than just physical pain. "I have been there before," Taji assured her. "And if my cousin's reports are true, we may not be alone. There may be someone there who can help us, someone your husband trusted." Eliza's eyes widened with sudden hope and confusion. "What do you mean?" "Your people speak of a doctor who disappeared from Iron Ridge," Taji explained as he resumed pulling the travois toward their destination. "A man who witnessed something terrible and fled to the high country to escape those who would silence him. The elders of my tribe have seen his sign near the old mine." The revelation hit Eliza like a physical blow. Dr. Morrison. But the soldiers said he was dead. Kane seemed certain of it. "More white soldiers believe what they choose to believe," Taji replied. "But the mountains keep their own counsel, and sometimes they shelter those who seek justice rather than profit." As they approached the dark opening that marked the entrance to Widow's Whale mine, both of them felt the weight of possibilities shifting around them. If Dr. Morrison was indeed alive and hiding in the depths of the abandoned workings, then the evidence against Hutchins would be even more powerful than they dared hope. But first they had to reach safety, and behind them, the sounds of Kane's pursuit were growing steadily closer. The mine entrance was a roughly hewn opening in the mountainside, reinforced with heavy timber supports that looked solid despite their age. Mining equipment still lay scattered about the area, rusted picks and shovels, abandoned ore carts, coils of rotting rope that spoke of the dangerous work that had once been done here. Taji helped Eliza from the travois and supported her weight as they made their way into the darkness of the main tunnel. The air inside was cool and still carrying the faint sense of old smoke and something else, something that suggested recent human habitation. "Hello," Eliza called softly, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "Is anyone there, Dr. Morrison?" For a long moment, there was only silence. Then from somewhere deeper in the mine came the sound of movement, cautious footsteps approaching through the darkness. A figure emerged from a side tunnel, carrying a flickering candle that cast dancing shadows on the rock walls. He was an elderly man, with a graying beard, wearing the rumpled clothes of a frontier doctor. His eyes widened with shock when he saw Eliza and the baby she was clearly about to deliver. "Mrs. Warren." Dr. Samuel Morrison said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dear God, I thought Hutchins had killed you weeks ago. How did you find me here?" "Thomas left me a letter." Eliza replied, tears streaming down her face at the sight of the man who could corroborate everything her husband had died trying to prove. "He said to trust you above all others, that you knew the complete truth about what Hutchins has done." Dr. Morrison nodded gravely, his medical training taking over as he saw her condition. "You're in labor, aren't you, and far too early?" He looked at Taji with curiosity, but no apparent fear. "You have an unlikely protector, Mrs. Warren. Hutchins sent men to kill us both," Taji said simply. "They think you are dead, but they know she carries evidence that could destroy him. We have little time before they find this place." As if summoned by his words, the sound of hoofbeats echoed from outside the mine entrance, accompanied by Kane's harsh voice. "Tracks lead right up to the mine opening. They're in there somewhere, and there's no other way out." Dr. Morrison's face went white with terror. "They've found us. After all these weeks of hiding, they've finally found us." But Taji was already moving, gathering the scattered mining equipment and positioning it to create defensive barriers. His warrior's mind was working with practiced efficiency, analyzing the tactical situation and formulating a plan that might give them a chance of survival. "Doctor," he said quietly, "how well do you know these tunnels?" "I've been living here for 6 weeks." Morrison replied, his voice steadying as he focused on the immediate crisis. "I know every passage, every chamber, every potential hiding place. And the structural integrity, are the support timbers solid?" Morrison understood immediately what the warrior was thinking. "Some areas are questionable, the deeper workings especially. A few of the support beams are rotted, barely holding up sections of the ceiling." Eliza, despite her pain and exhaustion, grasped the implications of their conversation. "You're thinking of bringing down part of the mine to stop them, only if we have no other choice," Taji replied, checking his rifle and counting his remaining ammunition. "First, we try to discourage them from entering. If that fails..." He let the sentence hang unfinished, but they all understood what he meant. Outside the mine, Kane's voice carried clearly through the darkness. "Light some torches and check every tunnel. They can't hide from us forever in there." The baby came in the depths of the mine, small and slippery, but breathing strongly despite his premature arrival into a world of danger and violence. Dr. Morrison's hands were steady and sure as he helped bring new life into the world, his medical expertise invaluable in the underground chamber that had become their sanctuary. "He's perfect," Eliza whispered, tears streaming down her face as she held her son for the first time. The baby's cry was weak but determined, echoing off the stone walls of their hiding place, deep in the abandoned workings. "He's a fighter." Morrison agreed, checking the infant's reflexes with the automatic attention of a physician. Premature but healthy with strong lungs and good color. He'll survive if we can keep him warm and safe. But the sound of the baby's cries had carried farther through the mine tunnels than any of them had hoped. From somewhere in the maze of passages came Kane's triumphant shout, "I heard something this way." Taji quickly gathered their few possessions, helping Eliza wrap the baby in strips of cloth torn from his own shirt. "We need to move deeper into the mine. Dr. Whichway offers the best defensive position." Morrison considered their options with the careful deliberation of a man who had spent weeks learning every detail of his underground refuge. There's a large chamber about 200 yards deeper in the main working area, where they extracted the richest ore. It has multiple entrances and good sight lines, but also... He hesitated, his face troubled, but also what Taji pressed. The support structure is questionable. Some of the main beams are rotted through, barely holding up tons of rock and earth. Any significant vibration could bring down that entire section of the mine. The chamber that opened before them was larger than Eliza had expected. A natural cavern that had been expanded by human effort, with a high ceiling supported by a network of heavy timber beams. Mining equipment lay scattered throughout the space picks, shovels, wheelbarrows, and coils of rope that spoke of the dangerous work that had once been done here. More importantly, for their immediate situation, the chamber had 4 separate entrances, offering multiple fields of fire and several potential escape routes. But even in the flickering candlelight, Eliza could see that Dr. Morrison's concerns about structural integrity were well-founded. Several of the main support beams showed obvious signs of decay, with dark stains that spoke of water damage and rot eating away at the wooden pillars that held up the ceiling. Positions, Taji said quietly, beginning to arrange mining equipment to create defensive barriers at the main entrances. "Doctor, you stay with Mrs. Warren and the baby. If shooting starts, keep them behind that pile of ore carts." Morrison picked up a mining pick, testing its weight and balance. "I've never killed a man, but I won't stand by and watch them murder a newborn child." As if summoned by his words, Kane's voice echoed through the chamber from one of the tunnel entrances. "End of the line. We know you're in there, and there's no way out except through us." The battle in the depths of Widow's Whale Mine was unlike anything any of them had experienced before. It began when Kane and his men entered the chamber with rifles ready, expecting to find helpless victims cowering in the darkness. Instead, they found themselves in a firefight with enemies who had transformed the underground space into a fortress, using mining equipment as cover, and the chamber's multiple entrances to create crossfire that pinned down the attackers. Taji moved through the shadows like a vengeful spirit, his knowledge of the chamber's layout allowing him to strike and vanish before his enemies could respond. Dr. Morrison proved surprisingly effective with improvised weapons, using his medical knowledge of human anatomy to inflict maximum damage with mining tools. But it was Eliza who turned the tide of battle with desperate ingenuity. While cradling her newborn son, she spotted the oil lanterns left by the miners and realized they could be used to create both fire and structural collapse. The flames spread quickly to the rotted support beams, weakening the ceiling and filling the chamber with choking smoke. Kane fell to Taji's knife in the chaos, but not before part of the mine's ceiling collapsed, blocking the main entrance and creating a new opening that led to natural caves beyond the original workings. Through this gap, the 3 survivors escaped into the dawn, carrying with them the evidence that could destroy Garrett Hutchins and the baby who had been born into violence, but would grow up knowing justice. 3 days after their escape from Widow's Whale Mine, Eliza Warren sat beside a small stream in a hidden canyon that Taji called the place where spirits rest. Her newborn son slept peacefully in her arms, stronger now, despite his premature birth and the traumatic circumstances of his arrival into the world. Dr. Morrison was examining the baby with gentle hands, his medical training evident in every careful movement. The elderly physician had recovered remarkably well from his ordeal in the mine, though dark circles under his eyes spoke of weeks of fear and hiding that would take time to fully heal. His breathing is excellent now, Morrison said with satisfaction. Color is good. Reflexes are strong. He's going to be fine, Mrs. Warren. More than fine, he's going to thrive. Thanks to both of you, Eliza replied, looking from the doctor to Taji, who was keeping watch from a high rock overlooking their sanctuary. I never could have saved him alone. Taji climbed down from his perch, moving with the fluid grace of a man completely at home in the wilderness. My cousin Nalnish will be here soon, he announced. I saw his signal fires in the distance, 3 columns of smoke, the pattern we agreed upon for safe meeting. Can we trust him? Dr. Morrison asked, his weeks of hiding having made him cautious of any new contact. With our lives, Taji replied simply. Nalnish has been watching over us from a distance ever since we left the mine. He knows these mountains better than anyone, and he has news we need to hear. As if summoned by their conversation, a figure appeared at the canyon entrance, a young Navajo warrior with intelligent eyes and the easy confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. Nalnish moved toward them with purposeful stride, but his expression was troubled. Mercer, cousin, he said to Taji in their native language, then switched to English for the benefit of the others. I bring food medicine from the tribal healers and warnings that cannot wait. From his pack he produced dried meat, medicinal herbs, and clean cloth for the baby, along with a small leather pouch that contained something that made his face grave with concern. What is it? Eliza asked, sensing the tension in both warriors. Nalnish opened the pouch and extracted a brass-button military issue, but tarnished and bearing the distinctive mark of an officer's uniform. I found this near the remains of the mine, along with tracks that do not belong to Kane or his men. Dr. Morrison leaned forward, studying the button with growing alarm. I've seen this before. Officers from Fort Collins wore buttons exactly like this during the Indian campaigns. More soldiers. Eliza asked, her maternal instincts immediately focused on protecting her son, not soldiers. Nalnish said quietly. Something worse. I have been asking questions in the trading posts, listening to whispers from scouts and drifters. Garrett Hutchins has hired a new hunter, Silas Kane, brother to the man you killed in the mine. The name fell like a stone into still water, creating ripples of unease that spread through their small group. Taji's hand moved instinctively to his knife, while Dr. Morrison's face went pale with recognition. Silas Kane, Morrison whispered. Dear God, I thought he was in prison. You know of this man? Taji asked. Know of him. Morrison's voice was barely above a whisper. Every frontier doctor knows the stories. They call him the Vulture because he picks the bones of his victims clean. He's not just a tracker, he's a killer who takes pride in never losing a trail or leaving a job unfinished. Nalnish nodded gravely. The stories say he can track a snake across bare rock, that he knows the thoughts of his prey before they think them. But more than his skill, it is his cruelty that makes men fear him. And now he's hunting us. Eliza set her arms tightening protectively around her baby. For Hutchins and for revenge. The tracks I found were 3 days old. Nalnish continued. He is following your trail, methodically learning your habits, studying the places where you rest and the routes you choose. He will find you eventually. It is only a matter of time. Taji stood and began pacing his warrior's mind, working through their tactical situation. We cannot outrun him indefinitely, especially with a newborn child. But we cannot fight him here. This place is sacred, and innocent blood should not be spilled on sacred ground. Then what do you suggest? Dr. Morrison asked. We go south toward Santa Fe. But we do it in a way that gives us advantages he does not expect. We use his skills against him, lead him where we want him to go, instead of letting him choose the ground for our final confrontation. Eliza looked down at her sleeping son, his tiny face peaceful despite the danger that surrounded them all. How long do we have before he catches up? According to the sign, I read perhaps 5 or 6 days if we move carefully and leave no obvious trail. But Mrs. Warren, you have just given birth. Are you strong enough for what lies ahead? I have to be, she replied with quiet determination. This isn't just about justice for Thomas anymore. It's about making sure my son grows up in a world where men like Hutchins can't murder innocent people without consequences. Nalnish smiled for the first time since his arrival. Then you are ready to hear my plan. The plan that Nalnish outlined was both simple and dangerous. Instead of trying to reach Santa Fe by the direct route which would leave them exposed to Silas Kane's superior tracking skills, they would travel through a series of way stations and trading posts where they could gather allies and create confusion about their true destination. There is a small settlement called Cedar Creek, 2 days' ride to the southeast. Nalnish explained, sketching a rough map in the dirt with a stick. It sits at a crossroads where 3 different trails meet. If we can reach it safely, we can split up and take different routes towards Santa Fe. Split up? Eliza asked with alarm. And not permanently, Taji assured her. But Silas Kane expects to be following a group, a woman with a baby, an old doctor, and a Navajo warrior. If we can make him think we have gone separate ways, it will divide his attention and give us opportunities to set traps for him. Dr. Morrison studied the crude map with professional interest. I know Cedar Creek. There's a missionary there, Father Miguel, who runs a small church and provides medical care to travelers. He's a good man who has no love for corrupt officials. And the people there, Taji asked. Mixed some whites, some Mexicans, a few Indians who work as guides and translators. The kind of place where strangers don't stand out if they keep their heads down and minds their own business. Perfect, Nalnish said with satisfaction. We leave false trails from Cedar Creek, one heading toward Denver, one toward Albuquerque, one toward the Mexico border. While Silas Kane wastes time investigating these false leads, the real trail will lead south through the mountains to Santa Fe. Eliza adjusted her grip on the baby, who was beginning to stir in her arms. And if he doesn't fall for the deception, if he realizes what we're doing and follows the right trail, then we make our stand in a place of our choosing with allies we trust and advantages he cannot anticipate. Taji replied. But first we must reach Cedar Creek alive, and that means traveling fast and light while leaving no sign for him to follow. The journey to Cedar Creek tested every one of them in different ways. Dr. Morrison, despite his age and the weeks of hiding that had weakened him, proved surprisingly resilient on the trail. His medical knowledge was invaluable in caring for the baby and monitoring Eliza's recovery from childbirth, while his familiarity with frontier settlements helped them avoid places where Hutchins might have allies. Eliza discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. The combination of maternal instinct and righteous anger at her husband's murder drove her forward even when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. She learned to ride while nursing the baby, to move silently through underbrush, and to read the subtle signs that indicated whether a place was safe or dangerous. Taji and Nalnish worked together with the seamless coordination of warriors who had trained together since childhood. They scouted ahead for dangers, covered their back trail to prevent pursuit, and used every skill their ancestors had developed for survival in hostile territory. On the second day, they faced their first real test when they encountered a trading post that Nalnish's scouting revealed was being watched by men who might be working for Hutchins. 3 of them, Nalnish reported, positioned to see anyone who approaches on the main trail. They're asking questions about a pregnant woman and offering gold for information. Can we go around? Dr. Morrison asked. The detour would cost us a full day, and we need supplies, food, medicine for the baby, and ammunition if we're going to face Silas Kane. Taji replied. We go through, but carefully. The plan they developed was audacious in its simplicity. Dr. Morrison would approach the trading post, openly disguised as an itinerant preacher traveling south to establish a mission. His natural dignity and medical knowledge would make the disguise convincing, while his presence would provide cover for the others. Eliza would pose as his daughter, recently widowed and traveling with her newborn child to join relatives in New Mexico. Her grief would be real enough to fool casual observers, while the baby's presence would make most men uncomfortable enough to avoid asking too many questions. Taji presented the greatest challenge, since a Navajo warrior would be instantly memorable and subject to suspicious questions. The solution was to have him approach the trading post from an unexpected direction, posing as a guide who had been hired to escort the preacher and his daughter through dangerous territory. The deception worked perfectly. Dr. Morrison's portrayal of a kindly minister was so convincing that the traders actually asked him to perform a wedding ceremony for a young couple, while Eliza's obvious exhaustion and maternal preoccupation made the watchers dismiss her as harmless. Taji's arrival from the north, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies, completed the illusion that they were exactly what they appeared to be. They purchased what they needed, gathered information about the road ahead, and departed without raising suspicion. But as they rode away from the trading post, all of them knew they had been lucky. The next encounter might not go so smoothly. It was on the third day that they found the first concrete evidence that Silas Kane was indeed on their trail. Nalnish discovered it first, a distinctive hoofprint in soft earth near a stream where they had stopped to rest and water their horses the night before. The print was from a specially designed horseshoe one, bearing the mark of a professional tracker who wanted to be able to identify his own horse's sign among many others. He was here less than 6 hours ago. Nalnish reported studying the track with the expertise of a lifetime spent reading sign. Moving fast, but not carelessly. He knows exactly where we are going. How is that possible? Eliza asked, fear for her baby, making her voice sharp with anxiety. We've been so careful to leave no trail. Because he is not following our trail, Taji replied, understanding immediately what his cousin had discovered. He is following our destination. He knows we must go south toward Santa Fe, and he knows the routes we must use to get there. Dr. Morrison leaned back against a tree, his face showing every one of his years. Then we're trapped. If he's ahead of us instead of behind us, well, then we change the rules of the game, Nalnish said with grim satisfaction. If Silas Kane wants to be the hunter, let him. But every hunter can become the hunted if his prey is clever enough. What do you mean? Eliza asked. I mean, we stop running and start fighting, Taji replied. But on our terms, in a place of our choosing, with allies he doesn't know about. Nalnish smiled, and for the first time since they'd learned of Silas Kane's pursuit, Eliza began to feel hope instead of fear. Cedar Creek is still a day's ride ahead, Nalnish said. But there is another place closer and better suited to our needs. A place where the mountains themselves will fight on our side. Cedar Creek turned out to be exactly what they needed, a bustling crossroad settlement where travelers came and went, constantly making it easy for newcomers to blend into the crowd without attracting unwanted attention. Father Miguel proved to be everything Dr. Morrison had promised, a compassionate man who asked no awkward questions but provided exactly the help they needed. The Mexican priest examined the baby with gentle hands and pronounced him healthy and thriving, despite his premature birth and difficult first week of life. He provided clean clothes for Eliza, medical supplies for Dr. Morrison, and ammunition for Taji and Nalnish, all while maintaining the careful fiction that they were simply travelers in need of assistance. There have been men asking questions. Father Miguel warned them as they prepared to leave. Hard men with gold in their pockets and violence in their eyes. They seek a woman with a newborn child traveling with Indian companions. How many men? Taji asked. Just one, but he is worth many. They call him El Buitre, the vulture. The people fear him because his reputation travels ahead of him like a dark shadow. Eliza shuddered at the confirmation of their worst fears. How long ago was he here? 2 days past. He studied the trails, spoke with the guides, and paid well for information about the route south. But I told him nothing, and I cautioned my flock to do the same. "Thank you, Father," Dr. Morrison said with genuine gratitude. "Your kindness will not be forgotten." "Go with God," the priest replied, making the sign of the cross. "And remember that even in the darkest valleys, the light of righteousness can overcome evil." From Cedar Creek, they implemented Nalnish's deception plan with careful precision. False trails were laid in 3 different directions, complete with discarded items and staged campsites that would suggest hasty departures. Anyone following these trails would waste valuable time investigating dead ends. The real trail led southeast into the most rugged part of the mountains, following ancient deer paths and hidden canyons that only the most experienced wilderness travelers could navigate. It was here that Nalnish revealed the true brilliance of his strategy. "There is a place our grandfathers called Lugar de Truenos, place of thunder," he explained as they rode through increasingly treacherous terrain. "It is a narrow canyon where flash floods have carved deep channels through the rock. During the dry season, it is passable but dangerous. During the storm season, it becomes a death trap." Taji finished understanding immediately. "But the storms don't come for another month," Eliza pointed out. Nalnish smiled mysteriously. "Storms can be made by those who understand the ways of water and stone, especially when the enemy chooses his ground poorly." Dr. Morrison looked skeptical. "You're talking about deliberately causing a flood that's incredibly dangerous for us as well." "All warfare is dangerous," Taji replied. "But Silas Kane expects us to run to hide, to cower before his reputation. He does not expect us to turn and fight using weapons he cannot understand or counter." "And if your plan fails?" Eliza asked, holding her baby closer. "Then we die fighting for justice instead of living as fugitives," Nalnish said simply. "But the plan will not fail because we have advantages that Silas Kane cannot anticipate." The place of thunder was exactly as Nalnish had described, a narrow canyon with steep walls of red sandstone carved by countless flash floods into a maze of channels and debris-filled pools. During the dry season, it was merely difficult to navigate. During the storm season, it would be absolutely impassable for anyone caught in the wrong place when the waters came. But Nalnish had not brought them here to wait for natural storms. High above the canyon, ancient Navajo engineers had built a series of stone dams and channels designed to collect and direct seasonal runoff. With careful manipulation, these structures could be used to create controlled flooding in the canyon below. "Our ancestors were wise," Nalnish explained as he showed them the hidden mechanisms. "They understood that water is the most powerful weapon in the desert, and they built these systems to protect sacred sites from intrusion by enemies." "How do we know Silas Kane will follow us here?" Dr. Morrison asked. "Because we are going to make sure he has no choice," Taji replied. "Nalnish will lay a trail so obvious that even a blind man could follow it, leading directly into the center of the canyon. When Silas Kane arrives, he will find us apparently trapped with no escape route." "Apparently trapped," Eliza repeated. "There is a hidden path that leads out of the canyon through a break in the north wall," Nalnish explained. "Our people have used it for generations to escape from flash floods. Silas Kane will not know of its existence because it is invisible, unless you know exactly where to look." The plan was elegant in its simplicity, but dangerous in its execution. They would enter the canyon openly, making no effort to conceal their presence, and establish what appeared to be a defenseless camp in the center of the narrow valley. When Silas Kane arrived with whatever men he had recruited, he would find them apparently at his mercy. But the moment he committed his forces to entering the canyon, Nalnish would trigger the artificial flood that would sweep away everything in its path. The only survivors would be those who knew about the hidden escape route, and Silas Kane was not one of them. "There's one problem," Dr. Morrison pointed out after they had explored the canyon and identified the best positions for their deception. "What if Silas Kane doesn't come alone? What if he brings enough men to surround the canyon before entering it? Then we adapt," Taji replied. "But I do not think he will bring many men. Everything I have heard about Silas Kane suggests he is a man who trusts only himself. He will want to finish this personally to prove that he is superior to the brother we killed." Eliza looked down at her sleeping son and then up at the towering canyon walls that would soon become a battleground. "When do we expect him?" "Soon," Nalnish replied, studying the sky with the attention of a man who could read weather patterns like others read books. "The false trails will delay him, but not for long. A man of his skill will recognize the deception within a day or two at most." "Then we prepare," Taji said. "And we pray to whatever gods watch over fools and desperate people that our gamble succeeds." As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of distant hoofbeats began to echo off the canyon walls, the measured pace of a horse and rider, who were in no hurry because they knew their prey had nowhere left to run. Silas Kane had found them at last. The man who rode into the place of thunder bore little resemblance to his deceased brother Milo, except for the predatory intelligence that gleamed in his pale blue eyes. Where Milo had been crude and direct, Silas was refined and calculating. He sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man who had never failed to complete a contract studying the canyon, with the professional interest of someone who understood exactly what he was looking at. Behind him rode 3 other men, not the rough soldiers his brother had preferred, but quiet professionals who moved with the disciplined efficiency of experienced killers. They spread out automatically as they entered the canyon, taking positions that would prevent any escape, while their leader evaluated the tactical situation. "Mrs. Warren." Silas called out his cultured voice, carrying easily across the narrow valley. "Dr. Morrison, and the Indian who killed my brother. How convenient to find you all together in such a confined space." From their position behind a cluster of boulders in the center of the canyon, Eliza clutched her baby closer, while Dr. Morrison and Taji prepared for what might be their final battle. Somewhere above them, invisible among the maze of ancient stone channels, Nalnish waited for the signal to release the waters that would transform the peaceful canyon into a raging torrent. "You can make this easy or difficult." Silas continued dismounting with unhurried grace. "I'm being paid to recover certain documents and eliminate certain witnesses, but I also have a personal interest in the man who killed Milo. Surrender peacefully, and I'll make sure the woman and child die quickly." "And if we refuse?" Dr. Morrison called back, his voice steadier than Eliza would have expected. Silas smiled, and the expression held no warmth whatsoever. "Then I'll demonstrate why they call me the Vulture. I'll pick your bones clean while you're still alive to watch." Taji rose from behind the rocks, his rifle in his hands, but not yet aimed at the enemy. "Your brother was a fool who underestimated his opponents. Are you the same kind of fool, or are you smarter than you look?" "Oh, I'm much smarter," Silas replied. "Smart enough to know that this canyon has only one way in and one way out. Smart enough to bring enough men to cover all the high ground. And smart enough to recognize a desperate gamble when I see one." He gestured toward the canyon walls, and Eliza's heart sank as she saw additional figures appearing among the rocks, at least 6 more men who had somehow entered the canyon without being detected. The escape route that Nalnish had shown them was blocked, and their artificial flood would be useless if they couldn't reach the hidden path before the waters arrived. "You see?" Silas continued conversationally. "I may not know these mountains as well as your Indian friends, but I know men. I know how desperate people think, and I know how they react when they're cornered. You're planning something clever, I can see it in your eyes. But cleverness without adequate preparation is just another form of stupidity. Dr. Morrison stood up slowly, his hands visible and empty. "What do you want, Kane?" "The documents, the baby, all of us. I want justice for my brother, and I want Garrett Hutchins to sleep peacefully, knowing that his secrets are safe." Silas began walking toward them, his men moving to cover him from multiple angles. "The documents will be destroyed, the witnesses will be silenced, and the child represents future problems that are best eliminated now." "Never," Eliza said, standing with her son in her arms, despite the rifles aimed at her from all directions. "You'll have to kill me first." "That was always the plan," Silas replied, drawing his pistol with fluid efficiency. "But first, I want to know where your Navajo friend is hiding. The one who's been laying false trails and playing games with stone dams in the high country." The casual mention of Nalnish's activities sent a chill through all three defenders. If Silas Kane knew about the flood trap, then their entire plan had been compromised from the beginning. "Surprised?" Silas asked, noticing their reactions. "I told you I was smarter than my brother. I've been tracking you for days, learning your habits, studying your allies. Your cousin is very skilled at moving through difficult terrain, but he's not invisible. Especially not when he's trying to manipulate water flow in an area where I have men watching every possible approach." Taji's expression remained impassive, but Eliza could see the calculations running behind his dark eyes. Their primary weapon had been neutralized, and their escape route was blocked, and they were outnumbered by at least 3-1. Yet he showed no sign of surrender. "You think you have won," Taji said quietly. "But you understand nothing about this place or the people who built it." "I understand enough," Silas replied, raising his pistol. "I understand that you're about to die." The shot that rang out came not from Silas Kane's weapon, but from somewhere high above the canyon floor. One of Kane's men pitched forward from his position among the rocks, his rifle clattering down the stone face as he fell lifeless to the canyon floor. Nalnish's war cry echoed off the canyon walls as the young Navajo warrior revealed himself on a seemingly impossible ledge, his rifle already working the bolt action for a second shot. But more importantly, the sound that followed his battle cry was the rumble of moving water. As ancient stone gates opened and released the artificial flood that would sweep away everything in the canyon below. "Take cover," Taji shouted, grabbing Eliza and pulling her toward the hidden crevice that Nalnish had shown them earlier. Dr. Morrison followed his medical bag clutched tightly as the sound of approaching water grew from a whisper to a roar. Silas Kane proved his reputation was well earned by reacting instantly to the changed situation. Instead of trying to shoot his escaping prisoners, he immediately began organizing his men for survival, searching for high ground and secure positions before the flood could reach them. But his knowledge of the canyon was incomplete, and he had underestimated both the volume of water that Nalnish could release and the speed with which it would reach the canyon floor. The wall of water that swept through the place of thunder was 8 feet high and moving with the force of an avalanche. It carried with it tons of debris, rocks, fallen trees, and everything else that had been caught in its path during the long journey from the high country. 3 of Kane's men were caught in the open and swept away instantly, their screams lost in the thunder of the artificial flood. 2 others managed to reach temporary safety on rocky ledges, but found themselves stranded as the water continued to rise around them. Silas Kane himself proved his survival skills by reaching the highest available ground and clinging to a precarious position while the flood raged below him. But he was now isolated from his remaining men, and his weapons were soaked and probably useless. From the hidden crevice where they had taken shelter, Eliza watched in fascination and terror as the peaceful canyon was transformed into a raging torrent that swept away everything in its path. Her baby cried in her arms, frightened by the noise and chaos, but she held him close and whispered reassurances she wasn't sure she believed herself. "How long will it last?" Dr. Morrison asked, raising his voice to be heard above the sound of rushing water. "Not long," Taji replied. The dams can only hold so much water, and once it's released, the canyon will drain quickly, but long enough to change the balance of power in our favor. As if to confirm his prediction, the water began to recede almost as quickly as it had risen, leaving behind a canyon floor scoured clean of everything that had been there before. Where Silas Kane's men had been positioned, there was now only bare stone and scattered debris. But Silas himself had survived, clinging to his rocky perch, like the vulture he was named for. As the water level dropped, he began working his way down toward the canyon floor, his face twisted with rage and frustrated bloodlust. "This isn't over," he shouted across the water-carved wasteland. "You think you're clever, but I've survived worse than this. I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth." "No," Nalnish said, appearing suddenly behind the man who called himself the Vulture. "You will hunt no one ever again." The final confrontation was brief and savage. Silas Kane was everything his reputation claimed: fast, skilled, and utterly ruthless. But he was also exhausted from his fight for survival, separated from his weapons, facing a young Navajo warrior who fought with the fury of a man defending everything he held sacred. When it was over, Silas Kane lay motionless among the rocks, where so many of his victims had fallen over the years. The legend of the Vulture had come to an end in a canyon that would remember his death long after his name was forgotten. From their hiding place, Eliza emerged with her son in her arms, followed by Dr. Morrison and Taji. They picked their way carefully across the debris-strewn canyon floor, stepping over the remains of their enemies and marveling at their survival. "It's finished," Dr. Morrison said, his voice filled with exhausted relief. "Finally finished." "No," Eliza replied, looking down at her baby, who had slept peacefully through the entire battle. "It's just beginning. Now we can go to Santa Fe and make sure that justice is done properly through law instead of violence." Taji nodded, understanding that their real work was still ahead of them. "The canyon has taught us that water finds a way around any obstacle given time and patience. Justice works the same way. It cannot be stopped forever, only delayed." As they began the journey that would take them out of the mountains and toward the territorial capital, all of them understood that they had been changed by their experiences in ways that would take years to fully comprehend. They had faced evil and survived, had protected innocence and preserved truth, had forged bonds that transcended every barrier their society had erected between different peoples. The baby stirred in Eliza's arms, opening his eyes and looking up at the faces of the people who had risked everything to ensure he would have a future. He would grow up knowing that his father had died for justice, that his mother had carried evidence of corruption across 100 miles of hostile wilderness, and that sometimes the most unlikely allies became the strongest friends when innocent lives hung in the balance. Behind them, the place of thunder stood silent and empty, its ancient stones bearing witness to another chapter in the endless story of those who chose courage over safety, justice over comfort, and hope over despair. The road to Santa Fe stretched ahead of them, carrying with it the promise of legal proceedings that would finally bring down Garrett Hutchins and everyone who had supported his criminal empire. But more than that, it carried the promise of a future where cooperation between former enemies might replace the cycle of violence that had defined the frontier for too long. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, 4 survivors walked toward tomorrow with the quiet satisfaction of knowing they had changed the world in small but important ways. The night that Thomas Warren died had seemed to mark the end of hope and the triumph of corruption. But from that darkness had come new life, new alliances, and new possibilities for justice that would echo through generations to come. 6 months later, the territorial courthouse in Santa Fe was packed beyond its normal capacity for what newspapers throughout the region were calling the corruption trial of the century. Garrett Hutchins sat in heavy iron shackles at the defendant's table, his once powerful empire of graft and violence finally exposed to the harsh light of legal scrutiny and public condemnation. The evidence had proven overwhelming in both its scope and its devastating precision. Thomas Warren's meticulously kept journal documented every theft, every irregularity, every family that had gone hungry because their rightful wages were stolen by corrupt supervisors who cared nothing for the human cost of their greed. Dr. Morrison's eyewitness testimony about the cold-blooded murder provided the personal account that made abstract crimes real and immediate for both jury and spectators. Most powerfully of all, Taji's detailed description of the systematic abuse his people had suffered at Hutchins' hands gave the case a moral weight that transcended simple financial crimes. His testimony about poisoned streams, stolen lands, and the cavalry raid that had killed his brother painted a picture of environmental and cultural devastation that shocked even seasoned court observers who thought they'd seen everything the frontier had to offer. But it was the story of their journey to reach the courtroom that truly captured the public imagination. Newspaper accounts of their escape from Widow's Whale Mine, their flight through the mountains with a newborn baby, and their final confrontation with Silas Kane in the Place of Thunder had transformed them from simple witnesses into symbols of ordinary people standing up against overwhelming corruption. Eliza sat in the gallery with her son, now healthy and thriving despite his dramatic entrance into the world 6 months earlier. The baby who had been born in the depths of an abandoned mine had become a powerful symbol for the press covering the trial, living proof that new life and hope could emerge from even the darkest circumstances when people of courage were willing to stand up for what was right. Beside her sat Taji, wearing formal clothes that had been purchased for the trial, but still bearing the traditional turquoise and silver jewelry that marked his heritage and identity. His presence in the courtroom as an official witness rather than a prisoner represented a fundamental shift in how the territorial government approached relations with Native peoples, a change that had been accelerated by the shocking revelations about Hutchins' systematic abuse of tribal rights. Nalanish occupied a seat nearby his status as a hero of the journey, having earned him recognition as an official representative of his people. His testimony about the artificial flood that had destroyed Silas Kane and his men had been delivered with the quiet dignity of a man who understood that some stories needed to be told for the sake of future generations. Dr. Morrison, fully recovered from his injuries and experiences in the mine, occupied the witness stand for the 3rd day running as he provided detailed testimony about the full scope of Hutchins' criminal enterprise. His medical training and natural attention to detail made him an ideal witness, able to present complex financial information and administrative corruption in terms that ordinary jurors could understand and evaluate. But the most powerful moment of the entire trial came when Eliza herself took the witness stand, holding her son, as she described her husband's final investigation and the night of terror that had brought them all together in the depths of Widow's Whale Mine. Thomas died because he believed that truth mattered more than money. She said, her voice clear and strong as it carried to every corner of the packed courtroom. He believed that working people deserved honest wages for honest work, that Native peoples deserved to have their treaty rights respected, and that no man should be above the law, no matter how much wealth or political influence he might possess. She looked directly at Hutchins as she continued, her gaze steady and unflinching despite the emotional weight of what she was saying. He died, protecting the evidence that sits before you today. Evidence that proves this defendant built his fortune on theft, murder, and the systematic oppression of anyone who stood in the way of his greed. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all charges. Hutchins was sentenced to 30 years in the territorial prison, with the complete forfeiture of all his personal and business assets, to compensate the victims of his various criminal schemes. The sentence was the harshest ever handed down in a territorial court for corruption-related crimes, but the legal victory, satisfying as it was represented, only part of what the 4 survivors had accomplished through their unlikely alliance. The real change was visible in the fundamental reforms that the territorial government had implemented in response to the shocking revelations about systematic abuse of power. Taji's appointment as the first official Native liaison between tribal governments and territorial authorities marked a historic shift in policy that had implications far beyond Colorado. For the first time in decades, Native voices would have formal representation in decisions that affected their lands, their water rights, and their people's future. Nalnish had accepted a position as a territorial scout and guide, using his intimate knowledge of the mountains to help honest travelers, while keeping watch for the kind of criminal activity that had flourished under Hutchins' protection. His reputation as the man who had engineered Silas Kane's destruction made him a legend among both his own people and the white settlers who were learning to respect Native wisdom. Dr. Morrison had resumed his medical practice, but now in Santa Fe, where his services were needed by families of all backgrounds and ethnicities. His experience in the mine and during the trial had taught him that true healing required not just medical knowledge, but also the courage to speak truth to power when innocent lives were at stake. And Eliza had established a school that served both Native and white children, built on the revolutionary principle that understanding between different peoples was the foundation of lasting peace and justice. Her curriculum included traditional academic subjects, but also courses in tribal history, cultural exchange, and the kind of mutual respect that would be necessary for building a society where cooperation replaced conflict. On a warm afternoon in late spring, almost a year after their ordeal in the mine, the four friends stood together on the porch of Eliza's home in Santa Fe, watching her son take his first confident steps across the wooden planks. The baby, who had been born in darkness and violence, was now walking steadily toward the light, reaching for a future that would be brighter and more just than the past that had nearly claimed his life. "He's growing so fast." Dr. Morrison observed his weathered hands, gentle as he checked the child's reflexes and development, with the automatic attention of a physician who had helped bring this life into the world under impossible circumstances. "My children have a way of doing that when they're surrounded by love and security," Eliza replied, scooping up her son as he tottered toward the edge of the porch. "He won't remember any of what happened in that mine or the canyon, but he'll grow up knowing that justice is possible when people are willing to fight for it." Taji nodded, his scarred face softened by the kind of genuine smile that had been rare in his life before their paths had crossed. "He will grow up in a world where the barriers between our peoples are breaking down, where cooperation is replacing the old hatreds that kept us apart for too many generations. The prophecies of my grandfather spoke of such a time." He continued, reaching out to touch the child's tiny fingers as the boy grasped at the evening air. "A time when enemies would become brothers in the fight against greater evils, when justice would triumph over corruption through unexpected alliances." Nalnish, leaning against the porch railing with the easy confidence of a man who had proven himself in battle, smiled at his cousin's philosophical words. The old ones were wise, but they could not have foreseen how strange those alliances would be. A widow carrying her husband's evidence, a doctor hiding in a mine, and two Navajo warriors fighting alongside them against common enemies. Dr. Morrison adjusted his spectacles and smiled at the conversation's turn toward the mystical. "Well, I don't know much about prophecies, but I do know that what we accomplished together changed more than just our own lives. It changed the course of history in this territory." As the sun set behind the mountains that had witnessed so much violence and transformation over the past year, the four friends stood together in comfortable silence, united not just by shared trauma, but by shared purpose and mutual respect. They had proven that justice was possible when people of courage were willing to stand up for what was right, regardless of the personal cost or the obstacles that seemed to make success impossible. The baby gurgled happily in his mother's arms, surrounded by love, and protected by bonds that had been forged in crisis and tempered by sacrifice. He would grow up knowing that his father had died for justice, that his mother had risked everything to preserve truth, and that the most unlikely allies had become his chosen family when his life hung in the balance. The corruption that had poisoned the territory for years was broken. Its architect behind bars and its victims beginning to heal from decades of systematic abuse. The alliance between former enemies had created something unprecedented in the history of the frontier. A genuine partnership built on mutual respect and shared commitment to justice for all people, regardless of their background or the color of their skin. In the distance, thunder rumbled across the mountains, but it was the sound of a passing spring storm, bringing life-giving rain to the high country rather than the threat of violence and destruction. The night was peaceful, filled with promise rather than danger. And tomorrow would bring new opportunities to build the kind of world where children of all races could grow up together in safety and mutual understanding. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky above Santa Fe, 4 people who had once been strangers stood together as family, united by the knowledge that they had changed not just their own lives, but the fundamental nature of justice and cooperation in their corner of the frontier. The night Thomas Warren died, the future had seemed dark and hopeless. But from that darkness had come new life, new alliances, and new hope for a world where truth could triumph over corruption. When people of courage were willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of what was right. The baby reached toward the stars with tiny fingers grasping at light and possibility, with the instinctive optimism of new life. His birth had marked not just the beginning of one small existence, but the transformation of 4 adults who had learned that the bonds forged in crisis could transcend every barrier that history and prejudice had erected between different peoples. It was exactly the kind of legacy that justified every risk they had taken and every sacrifice they had made during those desperate hours in the depths of Widow's Whale Mine and the Place of Thunder, where justice and corruption had collided in battles that would echo through the generations to come. Ooh.